Welcome to this second part of the series in which we try to understand how breath can be a secret key to enhanced living. I, Sohom Chakrabarty, will take you through a systems engineer's perspective of breath and try to understand how breath can influence the human system and thereby control or regulate the outputs from the human system. So let us go ahead and see how this works. We have to treat breath as a system input to this human system that we are. Breath is an input to the human system because we are taking in the breath, taking in this air and letting out this air. So this breathing is working as an input to this system and making it work. If you just pay attention and observe that whatever we may be doing, we are breathing all the time. From birth to death, this breathing is always happening, it never stops. Of course, there are other inputs to the human system like food, environment, people we meet with, etc., etc. But all that keeps on varying. Breathing is constant, and breathing is one input that we have complete control of. We are breathing. No one is forcing us to breathe. In whatever manner we like, whatever manner we wish, we can actually take the breath. Sometimes we don't even have the control on the food we eat. Sometimes we don't have control on the environment. So all these things are not in our control, but breathing is completely in our control, and the breathing is always happening. So breathing is the most important input to the human system. That is what I have tried to stress here. It is the major input to the human system because as long as we live, we are breathing. So we can say that we live because we breathe. So when we look at it from a systems engineering point of view, then we have to treat the human being as a system, and to this system, breath is acting as an input. Now, what are the outputs of the human system? Lots of different outputs from the human system. The work that this body does, the sensations that we feel through the senses, the emotions that are getting developed within us, the intellect that we have within us, with which we try to understand things, the thoughts that were produced within us, and there are lots of different other outputs that that can be produced from the human system. It's a very complex system. So a lot of different outputs can be produced from this system, and there are several inputs to this system also. As a system, if we look at us, we can always observe that we are working in this input and output sort of mechanism. We as a system taking in some inputs and delivering some outputs. So if we want to concentrate on only one input, which is breath, and this is rightly we can concentrate on that because it is the most important input to the human system, as I have already stressed. So we can treat this breath as an input to this system. When we are at this moment, at this juncture, so we have to now get a sense of how we actually go ahead and analyze systems from an input-output paradigm. So there is actually a very strong mathematical base to the analysis of systems from an engineering perspective. But for the purpose of this lecture, we don't need to go into too much details of that mathematics, but still we need to understand the overview of it in order to appreciate the relevance of this engineering understanding of systems and apply it to the understanding of human systems with breath as an input. So what is the prime thing? What is the fundamental thing? The fundamental thing is that the output signal of any system depends both on the system as well as the input signal. This is very intuitive, this is very obvious to anyone, this is very common sense, because if you change the input to any system, the output will change. If you change the system, also the output will change. If you observe various engineering systems out there, they work in the same manner. So if you change the current through a motor, the speed of the motor will change. If the same current is supplied not to a motor but to a pump or maybe an elevator, then you can see that the output will be different. The elevator will be lifted up or down. So it works in that manner. However, for the given system and the input, the output is always dependent on both of these. Now we have to understand two very important facts regarding the systems engineering analysis, and this is the following: that abrupt change in the input will cause more fluctuations in the output. What I mean by this, so normally what happens whenever we have a input, so here you can see this input age is rising, so from 0 the level is rising, and then there is a steady level, and then the level is falling again. So if I show you with the laser pointer, it will be more evident. So you see that the input is rising, becoming steady and falling again. So the more abrupt this change is, the more fluctuations will be there in the output. This is true for any system. This is true for any system. So this is a well-known fact in systems engineering. So the more abrupt the change in the input, there are more fluctuations in the output. And these transients, these fluctuations are also called transients. These transients take their own time to settle down, irrespective of the duration of the input. That means if this input, suppose that this input was shorter like this, suppose the input was of a shorter duration like this, then this rising age, this abrupt change would have caused this fluctuation, which would have taken this much of time to settle down. But even before that, you are changing the input to the system, so it will not have the sufficient time to settle down, and what will happen is this, that it will again come down from here and do its fluctuations. So it will not get sufficient time to settle down at a particular steady state. It will not reach a particular steady state. From a systems engineer's point of view, what we want from any engineering system is to regulate its output. We don't want any system to have these transients in its output. If this is happening, what would happen? Just think of a situation. Think that you are in an automobile. So in the last lecture we discussed about the analogy between automobile and a human being. Perhaps this would suit better to give the example of an automobile. Suppose you are sitting in an automobile, and what is the output of that automobile? The automobile is running at a constant speed. Suppose the speed is changing every now and then, or all the while it is changing, it is not remaining constant, that means you will always be experiencing a jerking motion inside the vehicle. Would you like to be inside a vehicle which is always in a jerking motion? Obviously not. So why would you like to be in a system which is the human system, which is always in a jerking motion? You should not. You should not like to be inside the human system which is always suffering this sort of jerking motion. We want our own outputs to also be stable. We want our thoughts, our work, our senses, everything to have a stability. Those are the outputs of the human system, and we want them to also be stable. Only then can we deliver we have a good sense of living, and we can deliver a performance, we can deliver a good performance in whatever we are doing. Now, in order to know how to get that stable output from our own system, we need to understand our input, which is the breath. What is the nature of this input? Only when we understand the nature of this input will we have any control over it, and by controlling that input we will be able to regulate our output. We already discussed this, the nature of our breath, the cycles of our breathing in our last video, and we understood that along with inhalation and exhalation there are also retention or holding periods, both in and out. And this action, the breathing action, is not entirely involuntary. There is a degree of voluntary control. So we can regulate our breath. So we can regulate the input signal that is influencing our outputs in a continuous fashion. So this, because this input is continuous to our system, we are living because we are breathing. That is why this is the most important input, and suddenly we realize that we have a degree of control over it. We can exercise this control, we can influence our input, or as I may say, we can design our input. In terms of the systems engineering, we can say we can design our input in order to get a desired output from the system. Now, what we already have discussed before also about shallow breathing and deep breathing, and from the systems engineering perspective also, if we try to understand what is shallow breathing is the rapid and short inhalation and exhalation. Rapid means the input rises very fast, short means it has a very less time, and then again it falls very sharp and it gives a very less time before it again rises up, and this continues like this. So this would be like a shallow breathing sort of a signal. So I had drawn that signal in the next slide in a much better way, we can see. But what would be deep breathing? In deep breathing, this rising time would be longer, then there will be a long time to allow the outputs to settle down, and then it will again come down in a longer time. So this exhalation will happen in a longer time, and then again there will be a period of holding or retention that we can keep. So this is like the cycle of deep breathing, this is like shallow breathing. And as we have already understood that shallow breathing will cause greater transiency in the outputs, and the system outputs will not get sufficient time to settle down. So we will always be in a state of jerking motion. the human system will always be in a state of jerking motion. While deep breathing will help us to reduce the transiency as well as give us sufficient time for our own system outputs to settle down. And this has been revealed in a lot of research, that deep breathing gives you more calmness and makes you more stable in adverse situations. It regulates, or it is able to control your blood pressure and make your many system attributes and system parameters are within the levels of control that is required to have a healthy life and a balanced mental state, while shallow breathing causes the adverse effects, the opposite effects. If we just think back and analyze our own selves, we will see that when we are in anxiety, then we are breathing very rapidly, and when we are in a very relaxed mood, our breathing rate also decreases. We can also do the opposite. That means we can decrease our breathing rate and make us come to a relaxed position. As we already have understood from the systems engineering perspective, the input is controlling the output. So we can have a handle over the input, we can make deep breathing, we can practice deep breathing and reach a relaxed state and a stabilized state. So we have drawn up some inputs. So this first one is like the deep breathing. So this is the deep breathing signals. So this part is the inhalation, then the retention, then the exhalation, and again the holding. However, I would so these times are not to scale. That means you may not be able to hold for so long duration, may not be able to retain for this long duration. This is just for the purpose of showing you how it works. So however, if we have these longer durations, then what will happen, the output will rise like this. Maybe there is a small fluctuation, but it will die down also. Eventually it will have sufficient time for dying down and it will reach a steady state. Again from here it will fall down and there will be some fluctuations, and then again it will reach steady state, and this cycle will repeat. However, this one we may call the shallow breathing signal. So this is like the breath signal I have tried to draw. So this is the shallow breathing. So what happens here, the inhalation is very rapid and also very short. So what happens, there is a rapid fluctuation, more fluctuations, and there is no sufficient time for the fluctuations to die down. Before that, again the exhalation happens and there is no time for it to die down. Again the inhalation happens, and in this way it continues. So the output is always in an oscillatory motion or in an oscillatory nature. So we remain in anxiety, we remain in indecision. So all these very negative things, negative psychological things, as well as it reflects in our physical behavior. So these things show up from the human system. We wish to avoid that, isn't that? So we wish to come to a steady state, we wish to come to a state of calm from which we can deliver the better performance. And deep breathing allows us to do that. Deep breathing stabilizes the outputs, leading to the improved system performance. It doesn't need me to state that when the outputs are stabilized or regulated or at a steady state, then the system performance is improved. So that is what, from an engineer's viewpoint, is defined as the improved system performance. We don't wish transients to be in the output of any engineering system. We wish them to be at a steady state as fast as they can reach and be there in the steady state. So why not the same thing we should desire from the human system? The human system will also work at its level-based performance when these different outputs are in a well-balanced, regulated state. Then only it will be able to deliver its optimum performance. So the key takeaway from this lecture is that the understanding that breath is the most important input to the human system. We also understood the signals and systems analogy of breathing, and that led us to understand, to appreciate the fact that shallow breathing is detrimental to our system, to our system's deliverables, whereas deep breathing is beneficial. So we must be practicing deep breathing for an enhanced living. So that is the secret actually. So we must be practicing deep breathing for improved performance. If you learned anything new in this lecture, it is now time to apply that knowledge to practice, and that is exactly what is wisdom. So be safe and be wise. If you learned anything new in this lecture, it is now time to apply that knowledge in your life. Remember, wisdom is nothing but utilization of your knowledge to improve your living. So be safe and be wise.
If you have any queries, please post them in the comment box below. We'll be glad to take up the questions in our future videos. If you are interested in attending live webinar sessions on discussions related to ancient Indian philosophies and their practicality in modern day lives, with which we'll be starting shortly, do not forget to register yourself in the registration link given in the description box. Please note that we are accepting registrations till 20th May only. If you like this video, hit the like button and do not forget to subscribe and share. To continue with this series, move on to the next video.